Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Picture yourself anywhere, at work, walking through a familiar or unfamiliar place, on a third date, maybe a concert. For a moment, everything is perfect, exactly where you want it to be, feeling at ease, until you're not. Something's off. You can't quite put your finger on it, but a creeping sense of dread settles in. Before you can react, your reality blurs, slipping away into a series of hazy events. Minutes, hours, maybe even days vanish, leaving you with nothing but that same fear that you felt before. What happened during that lost time? Did you escape something? And if so, what was it? And where is it now? Tonight's stories may seem unrelated at first glance, but they're all connected by threads of uncertainty and the enigma of lost time. Some understand how it happened and are left in the dark, but every one of them is haunted by the gaps in their memories and how they came to be. They share what they can, even though for some, the truth remains just out of reach. So, let's get started, shall we? When I was 13, I spent a month at my uncle's ranch. He was short on help, and I wanted to learn how to see the mountains. There wasn't as much downtime as I imagined when I first agreed to go, but I managed to find a few hours to myself in the evenings. Mostly, I just explored the property. I especially liked hiking the trails. Uncle Leo gave me a Sunday off to explore properly, but warned me not to go past any area marked with stacked stones. I made a joke about the Blair Witch, but he said that they were there to mark bear territory. That put the proper level of fear into me, and I was determined to stay off those paths. I left at sunup and had a grand old time for the first half of the day. By lunch, I was well into new territory and ate my sandwich with a magnificent view of the mountains and valleys. Shortly after, I ran into an area blocked by stone piles and decided it was time to start heading back if I wanted to get home by dark. Just as I turned around, I heard a dog whimper behind me. The week before, my uncle's dog had gone missing, and we'd just about given up hope on finding him. I looked back just in time to see him walk behind a tree, and I called after him. I couldn't just leave, so I got the rope out of my bag and I went to go fetch him. I kept calling for him the whole time, but he wouldn't come out of the thicket. I could only see his face through the brush, but he was still whimpering, so I thought he must be hurt. I cut back the overgrowth as best I could. I only had my eyes off of him for a second, but when I looked back, he was gone. There's no way he got out that fast or that quietly, but he wasn't there anymore. I called for him again and looked through the surrounding brush. There was no sign of him. I didn't want to leave him with bears, but I didn't want to be out there alone past dark either. Ultimately, I settled for going back and getting help and a few guns. I must have wandered further than I thought because the stone piles weren't nearly as close as I expected. I went in circles for 10 to 15 minutes before I finally got going far enough to find them. I barely made it half a mile before two of the other hands rode up on four-wheelers, hooting and hollering. Jay hopped off and ran over to me while Marcus shouted, "We found him," into the radio. My heart sank. I thought that there had been some kind of accident or Leo had a heart attack, but all the fuss was over me. When it was finally calm enough for normal communication, I learned that everyone came looking for me when I didn't return on Sunday. It was now Monday evening. They'd been looking all day, and an actual search and rescue team was on the way. Even my parents were on a plane. I've never before or since been so confused in my life. I'm still confused. I'd forgotten all about Buck until it was my turn to explain. When I got to his part of the story, my uncle turned white, told me whatever I saw wasn't Buck. Buck came home that Sunday morning, an hour or so after I left. It couldn't have been him, but I saw him. It's not like I caught a glimpse of a random animal as it was running away. I saw that dog, only it wasn't him. I couldn't have looked for Buck for more than a half hour at most, and that's stretching it. Yet I had lost almost a full day. I never saw the sun go down. I never watched it rise. But I left Sunday morning and came home Monday evening. God, it sounds like a bad riddle. And I guess in a way it is a bad riddle, because what the hell happened? Besides a few scratches from digging through the overgrowth, there was nothing wrong with me. I was starving and more tired than I'd ever been, but that seemed understandable given the amount of stress I was under. I don't know, but if any of you have the answer, I'd sure like to hear it. My name is Erica. When I was 16, I was led away from my friends at a music festival. The man leading me had presented himself as security. The reflective yellow mesh vest he was wearing had the word security written on the back. He also had a walkie-talkie attached to the vest that had beeped a few times, and he spoke into it. In retrospect, I don't believe that walkie-talkie was even transmitting a signal, because there was never anyone on the other end talking back. But hindsight's always 20/20. You have lots of time to think about things after they've already happened. Summer 2007, me and two of my friends got tickets to the Vans Warped Tour in Darien, New York. We got there just as the sun was coming up, but we still weren't even close to being at the front of the line. It was supposed to be an overcast day, but the sun managed to avoid all the clouds, making very little shade for anyone to seek cover in. We were sunburned by 10 and still had an hour to wait until the gates were open. Then, out of nowhere, I'm approached by a guy, mid-40s I'd say, balding with wispy hair at the top, no tattoos or piercings. He was a big, tall, beer belly guy. If he hadn't have been wearing the yellow mesh security vest that barely fit around his shoulders, he could have been easily mistaken for just a regular festival attendee. He was slowly walking down from the front of the line. My friend Jesse noticed him making his way closer to us and thought that he'd be checking our tickets. At least that's what it looked like he was doing when he'd occasionally stop and talk to a random group of people in line. That was another thing that I should have been a little more suspicious about. The man in the yellow vest wasn't stopping for everyone. Sure enough, though, as he walked by us, I made eye contact with him and he slowed to a stop. Then he spun around and said, "Tickets, please? Can I see your tickets?" This was all of our first times going to Warped Tour. We didn't know this wasn't part of the experience. After we presented them, he says, "Oh, hold on," then steps away a few feet and talks into his walkie-talkie. When he's done talking, he strolls back to us. What if he thought our tickets were fake? We didn't know why he'd approach us a second time until he pointed his finger out to me and said, "One of the guys in All Time Low wants me to bring you backstage." I was caught off guard, but instantly blinded by wanting to believe it was true. Blinded enough to walk away from my friends with an older man wearing a yellow vest. The first question I asked was, "Can my friends come with?" But the man said something like, "There'd be a million people backstage if everyone brought their group of friends along. I can only take you." Turning to both of them, they wholeheartedly encouraged me to go, both of them still hugging on to each other with shocked excitement for me. We made a plan to stay in touch via text and to meet back up later when they were inside the gates. I followed the yellow vest towards the entrance to Darien Lake Fields. As we got closer to the tall chain-link fences that separated out from in, we veered to the right and began walking the perimeter of the fence. Of course we wouldn't be going through the main gates by the Ferris wheel. I was probably being led to an entrance that was closed off to the public. From behind the tarp-covered fences, I can hear instruments ring out as distant sound checks take place, but it never grows louder. Turning around, I saw how far away we were by the top of the roller coaster, distant in the landscape behind me. We walked far enough from the fairgrounds that I decided to finally ask where we were going. Now, in a large, dusty parking lot, the man turns and says, "We're going to their tour bus. It's only a bit further." I take out my phone to text Jesse an update as to where I am and what I'm doing, but before I can slide my lock screen open, he grabs my phone from me and tells me cell phones aren't allowed while doing a meet and greet. Well, I'd never been to a meet and greet before. I guess he knew. I froze when he took my phone, but I didn't say anything. It wasn't that I trusted him. Something in my gut told me this was wrong, but I already had come so far from the crowd, from my friends, far from help, that I didn't know what to do. I was 16, naive, and completely unprepared for the kind of danger I was in. We kept walking, my heart pounding faster now. The sounds of the festival faded behind us until it was just the two of us, alone in this dusty parking lot. I glanced around, hoping to see someone, anyone, but the lot was nearly empty. Only one car was parked off to the side, a beaten-up sedan that looked abandoned. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't right. There was no bus. I slowed my pace, trying to come up with an excuse to turn back, but he noticed immediately. "Come on, it's just up here," he said, pointing towards the far end of the lot, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Every instinct was screaming for me to get out of there. I think I should go back," I stammered, turning around, ready to bolt. Before I could even take a step, his hand clamped down on my arm, hard. "No, you're coming with me," he growled. And in an instant, he was pulling me off the path towards a dumpster at the edge of the lot. Panic was all that flooded my mind. I started kicking, thrashing, anything to get free, but he was strong, much stronger than me. My feet barely touched the ground as he dragged me, his grip like a vice on my arm. I screamed, loud and piercing, hoping someone, anyone, would hear me. But the festival was so far away, and the lot was too empty. He shoved me behind the dumpster, pressing me against the cold metal. I could feel my heart racing, blood pounding in my ears. I screamed again, but his hand moved to my throat, cutting off my air. My vision blurred, spots dancing in front of my eyes. I clawed at his arm, digging my nails into his skin, but he didn't even flinch. Just as the darkness started to close in, he loosened his grip for a moment, and I gasped, sucking in air. I managed one more scream before he slammed me against the dumpster, the back of my head cracking against the metal. Pain shot through my skull, and I felt something warm trickle down the back of my neck. I thought I might be bleeding. Then, out of nowhere, a loud crack echoed through the lot. The man's grip on me slackened, and he slumped to the ground. I blinked, trying to focus. Saw a group of guys standing there, one of them holding a skateboard like a weapon. He must have hit my attacker over the head. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, his voice urgent but kind. I could barely nod, still in shock and in pain. The man who had grabbed me was lying unconscious near the dumpster, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. I guess he was alive. One of the guys stayed with him, pulling out his phone to call the cops. The others gathered around me, guiding me away from the scene. "We saw what happened," one of them explained as we walked. "We were just hanging out, smoking a blunt in the car, and we noticed the security guy dragging you. At first we didn't know what to do, 'cause smoking pot, but we saw him choke you. We knew we had to do something." And thank God they did. They led me back towards the festival, towards safety. Their voices were a mix of concern and adrenaline, their immature nature only tempered by the reality of what had just happened. They were still kids, really, just like me, but they saved me. They might have just saved my life, I told them. By the time we reached the security and medical tent, I was shaking, tears streaming down my face. The staff rushed to my side, taking over from the guys who had rescued me. As I was being checked over, one of the festival's actual security guards arrived, questioning me about what had happened. The police came shortly after, and they took my statement, assuring me that the man who had attacked me would be dealt with and that I was safe now. But the terror of those moments in the parking lot, they stayed with me long after their visit. Thankfully, I just had to give a statement, and my rescuers also gave a statement. They were witnesses, and I never had to see that guy again, thankfully. But I know he was dealt with. It's hard not to get caught up thinking about the negative and traumatic pieces of the story. Trust me, I know. But that day, a group of strangers made a choice to act when they saw something wrong. Their quick thinking and courage saved me from a situation that could have ended very differently. So I share this story as a bit of a warning, a reminder that in public places like concerts where you can feel safe, surrounded by people and music, it's important to stay aware of your surroundings, trust your instincts, stick close to your friends, and never let your guard down, no matter how innocent or spectacular the situation might seem. I'm a 24-year-old female, and I recently decided to try Hinge for the first time, and quickly matched with a guy named Max. We talked for 2 weeks, had a ton in common, really hit it off, all that junk. He was handsome, athletic, funny. Some people would have seen those as red flags, but live and learn. Our first date was a picnic on the beach, and he actually looked like his picture, so I called it a win. He took me to the fair for our second date, and I thought there might actually be a future for us, so I decided to take the initiative for date 3. I invited him to my apartment for dinner and a movie. We had chicken Alfredo with garlic bread and caramel cake for dessert, my grandmother's special recipe. Afterwards, we cozied up on the couch with a little wine and started a movie. Pretty early on, we began making out, but I ended things before they could go further, gave him the whole like to take things slow speech. Max took it like a gentleman, poured us some more wine, and we put our attention back on the movie. That's the thing about a lifetime of bad relationships. You tend to fall for the first guy who treats you like a human being. Big mistake. I felt the drugs as soon as they kicked in, and let's just say my tolerance for narcotics isn't 0. I tried making it to the front door, screaming for help all the while, but Max grabbed me, clamped his hand over my mouth. With the last of my strength, I threw my weight into him and managed to push us into the wall, where we fell to the floor, tangled. Once on the ground, he easily got on top of me and wrapped his hands around my throat. My air was instantly shut off mid-gasp. It felt like my lungs were on fire, and my vision faded. I don't know if I can say that my whole life flashed before my eyes. It was more of a montage, all of my best and worst moments, along with a handful of the mundane playing on a simultaneous loop. The books I would never read, the shows I would never finish, the places I would never see. The instant before I lost full consciousness, I remember thinking, all of this because I didn't want to be single anymore. I'm telling you, if you ever want to get a new perspective on life, have a near-death experience. That shit changes you. But unlike what you see on TV, I didn't have any dreams or visions. Once I was out, I was out. Game over, black screen, sweet nothingness. When I began to regain consciousness, it felt like waking up in the morning. For a split second, I thought everything was normal. Then the pain started to set in. My whole body was sore, but my head and throat were throbbing, and it hurt like hell to swallow. That's when it all came flooding back to me, and I sat up screaming. I was in the hospital. My mom was there, and nurses began flooding into the room, everyone trying to reassure me. When I finally calmed down, I was informed that all of my neighbors heard the fight and came to the rescue. At first, they called 911, but when the screaming stopped, because I was being choked to death, the operator advised them to wait for the police. It was the elderly man who lived across from me that got a crowbar and forced his way in early. I've known Mr. Walters for years, and I'll be baking that man a cake every weekend for the rest of his life now. By then, half of the building was gathered and Max was subdued until he could be arrested. As it turns out, the lady who lives under me is a nurse, and she helped me the best she could until the ambulance arrived. A few days later, I learned a lot about Max, one being that Max wasn't his real name, but also that he was wanted in a neighboring state for an unsolved murder. It sounds like his trial is going to be a long one, but I'm determined to testify against him if at all possible, especially since at least one other victim can't. My son introduced me to this platform, and I've truly enjoyed reading all of your stories, so today I finally decided to sit down and share one of my own. In my early 20s, I was a manager at a KB toy store. One night, it was just me and another girl getting ready to close. I think our third closer had to leave early because she got sick or something. For safety reasons, we were always supposed to have at least 3 people working together, but that night it was just us 2, cleaning and organizing. The store was minutes from closing, and I was headed to the front door with my keys to lock up. As my hand reached for the handle, the door suddenly swung open. It happened so fast that I didn't realize what was going on until a father and son nearly knocked me over as they walked into the store. We both got quite a fright, and that fraction of a second between me looking up and the man's coat blocking my vision, it looked bright outside, like there was a car with its high beams on pointed directly at the doors. The toy store had a shade film over its front glass, which made it hard to tell what it looked like outside, but I knew the sun wasn't still up. I'd taken the trash out earlier and distinctly remembered grabbing the box cutter, because the garbage bins were in the alleyway. That little strip of pavement should be my next post because some of the things that happened in the alleyway behind KB Toys were absolutely horrendous and horrifying. I got to know multiple police officers on a first-name basis just from taking out the trash and seeing them so often. They were always back there with their lights on, investigating something. They'd always ask me if I'd seen anything, but for obvious reasons, we didn't use that alleyway for leisure breaks. We didn't use it for anything besides a trash dash. That's what we called it. But before I get more sidetracked, let's get back to the main subject of my story. It was pitch black outside and rainy during my last trash dash. But in that sliver of a view from the door that was opened, it was daylight. I caught myself before I could ask aloud, "Wait, was that daylight?" Thinking how absurd that question would sound. I made a quick, discreet glance at my wristwatch. My mind snapped back to reality when I saw that there were just 2 minutes until closing. Despite their grand entrance, I still managed to put on my best smile and welcome the customers into the store. Their ages and appearances aren't that important to the story, but by the way that they were dressed, I assumed they were foreign, French maybe. The only reason I thought French was because they're known for their style. And both the man and the child, they were dressed sharply. Their shoes were shiny and looked like they were both looking down and playing some miniature Game Boys when they entered, which partially explains why we collided. I'll also add that the man didn't apologize or even acknowledge that he'd bumped into me. I instinctively said sorry, but he just looked at me like he was annoyed that I'd grazed his coat with my forehead. The holiday season was around the corner, and there were rumors that higher-ups were acting as secret shoppers, firing employees on the spot for not upholding store etiquette. I don't know how true that actually was, but I wasn't taking any chances. This guy smelled like a corporate rat, literal and metaphorical, as I could smell his cologne from our brief encounter. The little boy standing next to him had clearly never had to work a day in his life. It was obvious that they were far from home, wandering into a KB Toys in that neighborhood at that time of night. Whatever they got would have probably been taken at knife point before they made it back to their car. Joking, but not joking. However, they didn't end up buying anything. They didn't even browse the recently organized shelves. After their initial steps into the store, the man's irritated expression changed. His eyes squinted as he began to look around. Pretending to be occupied with a task, I walked over to the Lego play corner to re-sweep the already swept floor. Anything to make it look like I wasn't staring at him, wishing that the universe would send this rude, confused man out of my store so we could close. But instead, the energy I sent out seemed to influence the man to engage me in conversation. I heard him shout, "Lady, you sell Macs?" Having no clue what he was talking about, I asked, "What?" He repeated himself, and I said, "I don't think I know what you're talking about," genuinely confused. I directed him to the toy trucks, the Mac ones, but that suggestion only made him angrier. He asked if I was stupid, started yelling at me about apples. The berating continued, and I couldn't answer his questions, of course, as if I were the one causing his problems by intentionally playing dumb. To top it off, he called me a racial slur before he and his son stormed out of the store. As soon as the doors closed behind them, adrenaline kicked in, and I sprinted to lock them shut. The encounter wasn't traumatizing, but I would think back to it from time to time, replaying the interaction in my mind, handling it more authentically in my thoughts. Despite that, it's never been fully forgotten. Even after I moved away for more than 2 decades, wouldn't you know it, after 30-odd years and the passing of my dear parents, I inherited the house that I grew up in. Over the years, the town had grown, notable businesses had set up shop, and the city began to expand exponentially. It was like entering a whole new area when I returned. Only the street names remained unchanged, although plenty more had been added to the signs. All the buildings were replaced with new ones, and all the old businesses inside were replaced with new businesses. The road I was on took me past where the KB Toys used to be. That parking lot was practically unrecognizable. Tons of construction had turned it into an outdoor mall, but the original structures were still there. Their bricks didn't match the newer, smoother buildings connected on either side. I instantly knew which building had been my KB Toys, but what it had been turned into made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There, where the big red and yellow KB Toys logo once hung, was now a silver apple logo encrusted in the bricks. Like the city, I grew alongside technology. I have an iPhone in my pocket right now, but never had I thought about my ranting racist customer story as a potential time slip, not until I saw that Apple logo. Now, don't get me wrong, that man is still an ignorant racist in any timeline, but here in 2024, if someone asked me about a Mac or Apple, I'd know exactly what they meant. This realization kind of blew my mind, and all I could do was pull into the parking lot and sit there, questioning reality. I guess that's why I mentioned the daylight they seemed to come in from. The whole encounter from start to finish left me feeling uneasy. Then for it all to come back full circle kind of sent me off the deep end. There's no way to ever know if my theory's correct or if I'm just an old coot overthinking things. The only way I'd figure it out is if I ran into that father and son sometime nowadays. If my time slip theory holds weight, they'd be living around here right now. I don't know what I'd do if I actually saw them again, though. I've decided to share why I don't do dating apps. I tried Bumble last year because I like the sound of the girls having to text the guys first. I think a lot of us do. I eventually began talking to a guy named Zach, and by the third week, he was the only one that I was talking to. We sent each other TikToks, watched the same movies at the same time, and had lots in common. But anytime I brought up FaceTiming, he had an excuse not to. If I was going to give online dating a try, I was going to do it right. I wanted proof that the person I was talking to actually existed. My friend once got to know a 25-year-old yoga instructor only to meet a 40-year-old tax assessor on the first date. I was determined not to share her fate, but mine turned out a bit worse. The more he pushed it off, the more suspicious I got. Finally, I threatened to block him if he didn't prove that he was who he said he was. I really expected him to either block me first or agree to FaceTime, but there was actually an unforeseen third option. 10 minutes later, I was informed that all of my social media passwords had been changed, and if I ever wanted to access them again, I should play nice. Obviously, I checked before responding. All of my apps were logged out, and my passwords weren't working. All of the messages and pictures that he had access to were flashing through my brain, and I wanted to crawl under my bed and die. He even sent me a few I'd forgotten about. He called me a whore, a narcissist, pretty much every derogatory name in the book. He asked me questions like, "Do you pose like that for every guy or just the ones who buy you dinner first?" If I didn't respond, he threatened to post the pictures. Up to this point, I thought he had only hacked my profiles and a couple of my apps, but it was so much worse than that. The whole time I was dealing with him, I was also texting my best friend, completely freaking out. I asked her to come over and Zach immediately messaged, "I don't know why you're bothering with Ashley. She can't do shit." He had hacked my actual phone. My first instinct was to turn it off, but then I realized that Zach also had my address, and that terrified me on a whole new level. I continued taking his abuse until Ashley arrived. I hadn't texted her again. I waited to tell her the newest revelation in person. Before I could finish explaining, she ripped the phone from my hands, turned it off, and reminded me that if he hacked into the phone, he had access to the camera and microphone. I would rather have all of my pictures posted than give that creeper another second's worth of footage. I tend to talk to myself about anything and everything, so he already had plenty. I'm sure he was getting off on my panic. Zach, if that's even his real name, was true to his word. My socials were flooded with my private messages, and I died internally. But mostly, I was afraid. He still had my address. Ashley went with me to get a new phone. I had to get a new Apple ID and spend the rest of my day apologizing to my friends and family for the images they were subjected to. Most everyone was very supportive to my face, so that was something. The police were worthless, no surprise there around here. I couldn't stay in my apartment alone, so I packed a bag and stayed with Ashley for a few days. Thank goodness I didn't save my friends' addresses. When I finally was brave enough to return home, my neighbor came out to tell me that a man named Zach had been looking for me the night before. I packed new clothes and went straight back to Ashley's. When I left work a few days later, a blue Accord followed me for a full 45 minutes, before finally going a different direction. That could have been a coincidence for the first half of the trip, but I purposely drove in circles at the end, and the car stayed with me for 2 full rotations. I drove around an additional half hour before returning to Ashley's, just to be safe. I didn't want to put my friend in danger, so I went home the next day. When I got there, I had a bouquet of roses leaning against my door. The card said, "I'll never give up on us." I called my parents and told them everything. An hour later, my dad was at my apartment with his suitcase and his .45. The following week, I had a new job. and the week after that, a new apartment. I never saw the blue Accord or heard from Zach again, and it's been a little over a year now. I definitely haven't tried online dating since, but if that's something you're going to do, please be careful what links you click. I'm pretty darn sure I had a time slip with my grandma when I was 13 or 14. She and my grandpa raised me off and on after my mom had passed away. Don't go grabbing the Kleenex box. This ain't about that, and it ain't sad. My grandparents raised me up good, and my grandma Joanne was my best friend growing up. On a random weeknight, the house phone rings. It's late. I'm in my pajamas watching TV on the couch in the living room while my grandma and grandpa are playing pinochle in the kitchen. Grandpa answers the phone. The muffled voice on the other end erupts so loud, Grandpa pulls the phone away from his ear, tells Grandma he thinks it's her friend and our next-door neighbor, Allie. She was another fellow senior citizen, but Allie didn't age with grace. She liked to party and hook up with the other lonely senior citizens in the community. Allie was a real homewrecker up until her funeral. She calls the house obliterated drunk, asking Grandma to come pick her up, not because she was responsible, but because she lost her car keys in a thorn bush outside one of her lover's houses. So, Joanne, with a heart of gold, tells Allie she'll come get her. Allie gives Joanne the address, and I help look it up on MapQuest.com, and I write down the directions. The destination was less than 10 miles away, and I offered to ride shotgun and give the directions as she drove. Joanne agreed, and Grandpa retrieved a gun from their bedroom and handed it to her. Grandpa didn't like Allie or the company she kept. He'd recently hurt his back, or he would have taken my place in the car. I got on my sandals, and we headed out to rescue Allie. The old Volkswagen we drove clunked, and its muffler would sometimes scrape on the ground, but I'd be damned if it didn't always get us from A to B. In Arizona, the sun sets real slow. There were fewer cars on the road around us, but it was still blazing hot outside. The wagon's AC was spotty at best, and it would only work in brief spurts. Our only way to cool down was to roll down the windows and cruise the empty streets to catch a breeze. That night, my grip wasn't as strong as it should have been, and a breeze caught the paper with directions written on it, snatching it right from my hands, out the window. Grandma Joanne saw the papers fly out and stomp down on the brakes with lightning reflexes. When the tires screeched to a stop, it went, "Read, read." The second "read" sounded like it was a question, like, "Read?" The best way to describe it was like giant rubber shoes on a basketball court. It didn't sound like the first gravelly friction skid, and for some reason, we sat there and laughed for quite a while about the silly noise we'd just heard. Then she put the wagon into park, turned on the hazard lights, and we both got out to look for the piece of paper I'd lost. I didn't notice anything until my feet hit the ground outside the car. One of my sandals got caught on a dry crack that had formed in the earth beneath me. When I felt the slight resistance stepping out, I looked down. I saw I wasn't standing on a street. The ground looked like desert. Grandma Joanne already fully out of the car, and the words I hear out of her mouth first are, "Holy shit." Then she starts telling me to get out of the car and come look around. Busy with my sandal situation, my shock was only a couple of seconds shy of hers. When I looked up, the barren desert that I'd gotten my sandal stuck in, it wasn't just a patch that had stopped under my feet. The dry desert floor was now all around us. Heat waves radiated with distant water mirages. In front of me, Joanne walked out further, with her arms stretched out wide, then turned around and said, "Well, how the fuck did this happen?" There was nothing in the distance in any direction. Joanne didn't look like she was scared, but I thought we'd die. We stood in a silent, hot, flat land with broken, dusty ground all around. Not a cloud in the sky. No sun either. The sky was still blue, but we couldn't pinpoint where the light was coming from. Joanne thought that we'd die too. She wouldn't tell me that until later in life, though. We both got back into the Volkswagen, but she couldn't get the engine to start. We'd never even turned the car off. So, with the temperature now hotter inside the car, we both got out and basically repeated what we did the first time, looked around and asked each other, what the fuck is going on? Without a better idea, Joanne pulled out her gun and asked if I wanted to learn how to shoot. If we'd had a deck of cards, I'm sure we would have done that, but we didn't. She told me all the must-know facts that someone should learn before being handed a gun, then instructed me to hold the gun out with both hands, stiff arms for recoil. I breathed in and pulled the trigger. My eyes closed tight when the gun blasted. When I opened them again, the first thing I saw was a palm tree a few yards in front of me, with a bullet in it. Dogs were barking, and I realized I was standing in someone's front yard. Joanne grabbed the gun, and she and I stared at the palm tree, examining it to see if it was real. Then the porch lights of the house whose yard we were standing in turned on, and all hell broke loose. If you didn't know this fact, all the old people around here have guns, and this homeowner clearly felt threatened by two strangers shooting his palm tree. Joanne grabbed my shoulder and pushed me into my open passenger door as a bullet whizzed nowhere near us. Thankfully, most old people need glasses to see what they're doing, and it seemed that we'd woken him up so suddenly he'd forgotten his when he chose to return fire. We noticed the wagon's engine was running again, hazards clicking again, AC spurting in bursts. Joanne ran around to the driver's side and dove in. She was surprised when she tried to start the wagon and it made a metal grinding sound because the car was already on. The old man at the door, he let off another shot, and we heard it hit glass from a parked car further down the street, which made Joanne throw it into drive and get our asses out of there. Another grandma would have had a heart attack, but my grandma drove over a chain-link fence to leave that neighborhood. And almost as soon as she did, we knew where we were again. That experience was all that we could talk about. When we got home, Grandpa told us that we'd left only 2 minutes before. He believed us, but couldn't help when it came to answers of any kind. We never did pick up Allie that night. When my grandparents passed, the questioning and wondering kind of died with them, as I had no one else who could understand the story. I don't really expect any of you to give a fuck either, but it's my Grandma Joanne's birthday today. So in honor of her, I'm capturing our memory forever on the interweb. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world over here. Subscribe and tap the bell so you'll never miss a thing. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos, and of course, double features. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons whom we appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, Adrienne, and TF Parham. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.